Hey folks, it's the Unsung podcast part 2 with Andy Falkous. We've been away for a week and now we've all come back to record in the same place but at a different time.
With the exact same settings and temperament.
Yes. This week we're going to be talking about some records that Andy really likes, that he thinks are unsung. Andy, what are those albums?
As far as I remember from the email, the album by the band, in no particular order, Jarcrew. The album was called Breakdance Euphoria Kids. Which is very me, because as you can tell, I'm well into breakdancing. Not kids, I should add. Euphoria, well, natural. Yeah. Well, euphoria, I think, you've got to understand the instincts for and against euphoria.
It's like your shag, marry, avoid. Shag, marry, avoid. Breakdance Euphoria Kids.
I mean, mate, I'm in my 40s now. Shagging and marrying. Jesus Christ. New Kingdom.
Yes, it just beats like that sometimes. Yes, it just beats like that
sometimes. If unicorns, no, it's called that's the first single off it.
Paradise Don't Come Cheap.
Paradise Don't Come Cheap. Yeah, Jesus Christ, I'm just saying the songs I like off the record. That's great. Hey, I've had a traumatic time. Show some fucking understanding, man. And the third record is The God Machine, scenes from the Second Storey.
Nice.
All very different.
Yes, very different.
Summing them up in a few words, I mean, Jarcrew's kind of like British post-hardcore type vibe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The God Machine, I'd affectionately describe it as Perry Farrell doing karaoke to Cult of Luna. And
interesting.
I know what Perry Farrell is, but I don't know what Cult of Luna is, so I just
and New Kingdom, it was a really hard one for me to put my finger on, because some people were calling them rap rock, some people were calling it rap. Rap rock was really rubbing me up the wrong way, but then
it's a horrible
when I heard that's a very loaded term. Well, what order would you like to tackle them in, Andy? The same or reverse?
You guys go for it. I don't mind.
Right, well, in that case, let's just start with Jarcrew. Talk us through it, Andy. Jarcrew, Breakdance Euphoria Kids. What is it? Why is it? And when is it?
Well, to give you an idea of why it is, you'd have to really know and have met Jarcrew, who, when I met them, I mean, they were children. And I don't just mean because by function of their age. I've met people who are 19 or 20 who weren't children. They weren't fully developed adults, but they were, they could easily pass as 30 or fucking get involved in an adult world in any way. Jarcrew were like the Bash Street Kids, like literally the Bash Street Kids. And we were doing a show in Le Pub in Newport, and a guy we knew called Richard, or Chill as he was nominally called, but I've always struggled. It's ridiculous since I'm now known as Falco, because it was a nickname, even though it obviously has an etymology through my surname. I kind of fought it for years because I just wasn't comfortable with not being called by one of my names. But everybody called this guy Chill, and I really struggled with that, especially since he seemed pretty stressed at times, it seemed. But he's a lovely guy. He's a He's a bit of a legendary fixture of the Cardiff music scene, worked at Club of Back. Great sound engineer, lovely guy. And he was doing sound for this band who looked just like work experience kids, and they were sound checking before they were opening for us at the show, and they were all playing different things on the guitars. They all looked really uncomfortable, not in any sense, and I say this as a compliment, not cool people in any sense of the word, like odd people, interesting odd, but odd. And they were playing all these different things. The singer looked like I don't even know, like something from A Nightmare Before Christmas. Just recently given new daps, and but then they just started playing, and it was just magic. It was like watching the very imperfect but just active creation before your own eyes, like. And it was just the definition of the way subsequently people would go on to write about Les Savifav, or I mean, I'm thinking about them particularly. Whereas when I actually saw them, it was a very good band, but it was a guy running around in front of a normal indie rock band. Mm-hmm. Like, although I quite enjoy the record Inches, like the start of that record.
I think it's a terrific record. It's very unusual though. It's their most unusual album.
Really, some really good. It's the first thing I heard by them. Some really good stuff on there. But Jarcrew were just. I've heard lots of stuff like that, and I've heard lots of stuff like that which is more self-consciously generic, I suppose. Mm-hmm. But they were just. I don't know. I suppose, like you could maybe saying about Dallas when we had a conversation, which was in last week's episode, which nice. Talking. Thank you so much. Saying it kind of happened at the right time. I think for Jarcrew, pretty much all of their developments as musicians, or they're coming across new things or dealing with things, all probably happened at the same time. It was just like a perfect marriage. And then when I heard the album, I was initially very disappointed with it because it just didn't have the same click to it. But listening back to it over the years, it has some, I mean, would I call them songs, really? I mean, they are songs, in the common lexicon, but they're not songs in, say, McCluskey songs are pretty simple things for the most part. They've got verses and choruses and fucking endless guitar motifs, which I probably should have said is one of the reasons why the third album sounded a lot different, because you can't fucking keep doing that all the fucking time. You've got, just for your own sake of your own sanity, you've got to change things up. But when I say Breakdance Euphoria Kids is an underrated album, I think it's got some fucking great songs on it. I'm more talking about the band that I saw, as opposed to just the album. Because frankly, the album, the way it's produced is, it's not it was done on a budget and a half. I mean, nothing. It was done Community Music Wales. It was originally recorded within a tiny studio. And frankly, it suffers from what a lot of low-budget studios, particularly at the time, would have, in that it was possible to record quiet or delicate things very well. But when it gets loud, it sounds like a local band at times. And that
the engineers often weren't really familiar with it, with a lot of loud music, and so that's a real. I think if it was properly recorded, it would be considered a classic of the genre. It's interesting because I feel a little bit of kinship with this album. Both David and I were from sort of much more parochial haunts. Mark, would you more part
He's
of
a
the
city
big
slicker?
Yeah, I was born and bred in Glasgow,
Yeah, so David was from way up north and I was from Stirling in the centre of Scotland. And even though Stirling's not particularly remote, it's culturally remote. It's Antarctica when it comes to like any real sort of like music scene and things like that. And as a result, you had that same phenomenon where going to the local studio, as soon as things got turned up, as you say, the sort of that quite hard to pinpoint, but that sort of sense of this is a local band manifested on the record because the engineers, they just simply weren't really particularly familiar with capturing that stuff. So there's something really endearing about this record for me, because I can tell this band, when they got this back to their house, were wrestling with all the same doubts that I was wrestling with on our first half dozen attempts at recording demos. And Dave, I'm sure you were in the same boat. As you said, it's interesting as well because it's a snapshot of almost the exact same period I started playing music. I was a bit like you, Andy. I didn't play my first concert until I was maybe 20. So I was really coming into music right we started on January of 2000 as a band, and Trail of Dead, At the Drive-In, Les Savy Fav, Blood Brothers, they were sort of what was happening as we started to kind of get into our stride. And as you say, there were also a lot of sound-alikes around at the time who maybe didn't have the je ne sais quoi that those bands had. It felt, being up in Scotland, that down in London, or certainly around, it was obviously congregating around London and around Fierce Panda, for example, that there was a real movement of bands of that sort of ilk. I mean, there was a little bit of jealousy on our part. We wanted to be part of that, but it was also some really good things, not just necessarily came from that at the time, but have since blossomed from that, from maybe the wreckage and the ruins and the compost of the bands that fell apart. I mean, what other bands do you recall from that time?
God, I can't really remember. Most bands I saw I just didn't like. It's one of all those reasons I've done music, is I never really see things I'd like. I mean, looking back at Jarcrew now, I mean, even listening back to it the other day with the benefit of, just years, I can hear little bits of Trail of Dead in there in a way that I couldn't hear back then, because Jarcrew are far, using the terminology of the music as opposed to in any other way, far spazzier fucking band than something like Trail of Dead.
Yeah.
But you notice there's some of those kind of, I don't know what you call them, there's almost like Arabic kind of 2-string kind of guitar runs or whatever, like in I don't even know what Trail of Dead songs are called, but there's that quite famous Mistakes and Regrets, is it, which has that riff?
I know what you,
there's that kind of style of riff, which it's not particular to Trail of Dead, lots of other bands have used it. She Sells Sanctuary, very hard for a Geordie to say that. But there's little bits of that. But to be honest with you, that time in music for me was, Jarcrew were one of the only bands who excited me that we played with. It's why we wanted to play with them all the time, because we loved playing with a band we thought were really great and we could go on afterwards. Sometimes we felt as if they did us, but most of the time we felt as if we did them, because we had fucking songs.
It's a good feeling though. It keeps you on your toes when you end up playing gigs with a band like that. I mean, I know Jarcrew appeared, the first time I really saw them on record was that Squirrel EP that Fierce Panda brought out in 2003. They shared that with Funeral for a Friend, the Copperpot Journals, who we'd actually done shows with. Million Dead, who you might have heard of, Andy, and
somewhat aware of them,
and a band called This Girl, who I remember seeing up in Glasgow. But there was also, just prior to that, Ruben had put stuff out in Fierce Panda, Jimmy Eat World, Stapleton, Kids Near Water, they were all in the same sampler. 98 you had stuff like Billy Mahoney. I was a big fan of Seafood. Certainly for their first 2 or 3 records I liked.
I remember them. I mean, of those bands you described, I mean, Billy Mahoney were more of fully respectfully, but more of a post-rocky slinty thing, weren't they?
They were.
Were they Too Pure? I can't remember. But I think for most of the bands you described, Jarcrew were totally different from all of those bands. Because Jarcrew was several different things at once, for better or worse.
Exactly, that's kind of what I was getting at. Jarcrew at various points, because Trail of Dead did actually release stuff on Fierce Panda at the same time as Interpol in 2000, and Jarcrew have got tiny little elements of a lot of the bands that were kicking in about that scene, so they're quite a nice synopsis of a lot of the different disparate sounds that we're going about, because they're very ambitious and they try to fold in all these different elements. I mean, there are definitely post-rock songs, especially on this version of this album, in amongst this collection, and there are songs that are, as you say, spazzy-ish, very frantic, very manic, very sort of Blood Brothers-esque. We should probably say that Breakdance Euphoria Kids is hard to get hold of, because it was a very small release and it was resequenced and I believe partially remastered and then re-released the following year just as the self-titled Jarcrew album, where a reduced track list, and some of the songs had been removed and a couple others had been added.
You did ask me. You did ask me about that in advance, and so I messaged Kelson because obviously he was subsequently in Future of the Left.
Yep, that's the vocalist
and I said,
and keyboard player. Yep.
Doing a podcast tomorrow, and is there a reason for the tracklist change between the two Jarcrew albums? And he replied with, "Fuck knows." So, so there you go. But honestly, we're trying to get Jarcrew to do all of these shows we're doing with us at McCluskey next year.
Yeah.
And they're lovely people, but they really are like, it's like dealing with a gang of woodland sprites who are eccentric even by the standards of other woodland sprites, you know, like just trying to get them to say yes to a show, or trying to get, and bear in mind I love them here, trying to get the cunts to get their gear off stage, you know, because they've got so much stuff. It's like
one of those bands, they immediately go for a beer rather than unplugging.
No, not even that, you see, because they're really lovely people. They stand there taking the wishes of well-wishers that they just hadn't counted on at all, looking like rabbits caught in headlights, you know. Because when we did shows with them like 4 years ago again, they were magnificent again, because they're all great, and Kelson's a fantastic frontman. I mean, everything you'd want from a frontman. But getting the stuff off stage was like, guys, you know, this whole night's happening around you, fucking leg it with your synths and stuff. Yeah.
So did they reform in 2014 for the Le Pub event? Was that the first time they got back together?
I think it might have been. I don't know.
Yeah. So the venue you mentioned at the start of that bit had a fundraiser in 2014, the Le Pub in Newport in Wales, and I think if I remember the lore rightly, that they got back together to try and help that bar, and then that sort of like sparked this interest.
Yeah, and you know, again, mostly apart from, I think, the guy who was editing NME at that time and about 8 other people, nobody else particularly rated, me included, nobody else particularly rated him, you know, which is still insane to me, because my anecdotal experience of seeing them is that nearly everybody who saw them was blown away, but it just didn't translate into anything. They were a weird band, actually, and I know we're not really talking about the album here, in that they really worked well as a support band. They would play a 35 minute set, and they would steal, whenever I saw them with other bands, they would steal the show from the support band every time I saw them. I mean, I would say with a degree of ego, except when they played with us, but sometimes they did steal it from us, and I don't say that very often. I don't. I mean,
they toured with Biffy Clyro, so I'm quite happy with that.
A young man, that's bait. They were. But when they progressed to headline shows, I don't know if it was because they'd done so many supports, like so many, for so many years. Whereas McCluskey never did, apart from the odd show, we never got a support tour. And that, in a way, defined us as a band, because we were very much against the world, not in a way which needed an Alex Ferguson speech to propagate. We just fucking were from an early stage. Whereas Jarcrew played with everybody, you know, in the same way that, and again, some of the nicest guys I've ever met, pulled apart by horses for a while, supported every band in the world. Yeah. It was like they want every... I know this isn't the case, I know it's to do with agents, but it was like they want everybody's Facebook page. You know, everybody's got that mate where someone announces a tour and straight away someone's like, hey, can we support? And you're like, my God, I hadn't even posted it yet. It was just in drafts. How did you fucking know that was coming? But they were everywhere. But when they stepped up to doing 45 minutes, they were still a good band. But when they did an hour, I'm not saying it didn't seem like their heart was in it. It just had a different vibe to it.
I think, bearing in mind as well, they only ever produced one full album. If you ignore the fact that this was sort of reshuffled, this one, they only ever produced one album's worth of material, is maybe a better way of putting it. So doing an hour's set without the luxury of being able to sort of pick and choose and arrange the flow, give your audience a bit of rest, and, you know, all the things that I'm sure you take for granted now, given the amount of albums that Future Left have got to draw on. and McCluskey as well. I think they didn't have that luxury, so stepping up to an hour is quite ambitious, and it's maybe not necessarily even that fair. Maybe their success or their popularity or just the circumstances are maybe actually hobbling them a wee bit in that situation.
A little bit, perhaps. I mean, I did hear a lot of the demos they did for their second record. I think one of the problems, this isn't even what I think, from what I've garnered having talked to members of the band, especially Kelson, who's still a really good friend now, even if he is a dentist.
It's another track title.
Nobody ever really gave them a deadline, and anybody who works in the arts in general knows, anybody who's ever got anything finished knows the value of a deadline.
Yeah.
You need a deadline, and even you need to learn. We learned trying to do the third McCluskey record the first time, and sometimes a deadline, even when you work hard and you try your best, it fucks you and it hollows you out from the inside when you don't succeed in making it. But you still need that deadline. Nobody really gave them a deadline, and they just swam on for a bit, doing things and writing some good songs. There was a couple of those songs which, again, they touched at a more commercial direction without being shit. There was some song about books, about my life or something, but it was a song which, I mean, I always used to joke and call "She Will Only Bring You Happiness," the McCluskey song, a Pavement cover, because it definitely came about from, well, it just sounded like even though it doesn't sound like a Pavement song, it has that kind of construction to me, and I guess it's a flippant way of disregarding something you've actually put all of your heart and soul into.
Yeah,
you know,
it's quite defensive, isn't it?
Yeah. It's getting the criticism in first. You know, it's getting ahead of the curve.
And the way you describe them, they sound like a band that would have benefited from a wee bit of sort of guidance and, you know, guardrails and structure. I mean, they do touch on some really strong poppy moments. I mean, I kind of take issue a wee bit with poppy. What I probably mean is accessible. They touch on some really accessible moments within even just this record. But Mark, I know you were pretty hot in this record as well. You liked it, didn't you? It seems quite up your street.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of it really resonated with me, because in places it sounds like Fugazi, you know, and like that's the hook for me. You know, I had that angular kind of emo vibe, both like, you know, early emo vibe, which I really enjoyed. I could hear bits of that in it, and I can imagine them being a bit like At the Drive-In, where legendarily supposed to be live. I can imagine seeing them live in that set and it just being pure chaos, you know, because their music sounds disjointed, but not in a bad way.
Yeah, I mean, can I just say very clearly, At the Drive-In were fucking manic live, but they wouldn't allow their audience to do fucking anything, so it was a little bit hypocritical. They kept stopping the set and being like, right, you're jumping about too much.
Don't dance.
Sit down.
Yeah, don't dance.
Sir, you appear to be eating a packet of blackcurrant chewits. You know only cherry chewits are allowed in Carling Academy venues. Personally, probably maybe because I wasn't like At the Drive-In just passed me by taste-wise. But I don't know. It's like with anything, isn't it? There's a degree of performative which appears real to one person, which appears just performative to another person. When I see At the Drive-In, I don't know. With other types of music, it isn't the same. But with rock music, I either see my people or I don't see my people. That's not a racial point. It's but I just don't. It just wasn't whatever. I think the thing you definitely on there with the Fugazi thing, which again, Fugazi are, I mean, probably objectively the best band that ever. You know, I say objectively, but in terms of the people I know, that would be. I don't know if they're everybody's favourite band, but I think overall they'd come out at number one if there was a survey of alternative rock people who've also can read 2 paragraphs without, you know, falling over and hitting their head on a table. You know, that would be the...
Well, see, that rules out my choice of Jesus Lizard then. So.
Right. Well, Jesus Lizard would probably be second or third, wouldn't they?
Nah, they've hit their head in a lot of things.
Yeah, a lot of things. And again, the Jesus Lizard, as magnificent as they are, don't really write songs, do they? In the way that
no, it's anti-songs. Yeah, they
are. When it's like when people call Future the Left on McCluskey noise rock, I go, whatever works for you. But the Jesus Lizard are a noise rock band. You know that if we need to fucking put labels to. We are meant to be a pop band. It's not a catchphrase. We're just genuinely not very good at it. Like, you know, it's meant to be pop music. But they definitely have that Fugazi thing. But I think the key thing with me with Jarcrew, whenever bands would have a funk or a jazzy element to it, dance, whatever you want to fucking call it, for me, with bands, it would always be painful. Make me want to smash something. When Jarcrew did it, there was nobody in that band was posing. There wasn't one pose. That part was that part because that was that part. All of it was real. Like every single part of it was real. Even the bits you don't like, that I didn't like, were totally real. I have this obsession with people's motives. And it probably says a lot about me. It's probably a worrying thing. And it makes me question, why? What's wrong with your motives? Are you really just in this because you want a harem or whatever? What's fucking wrong with you? But Jarcrew were there because there was no other alternative for being there on that stage at that moment. It wasn't a long-winded way to get to anywhere else. And that was there in every note of their music.
I mean, given that this was their first and last album to date, the songs wear their influences on their sleeves, and you know, from the singles like Paris and the New Math, which was the first thing they released. Which had that accessibility to it, as did things like was it Capel Baby? That was the other single they put out.
Love that song.
There's a couple of tracks got omitted from the reissue. I think it's a bit of a shame. I thought Bill Carson, which is the name of a character from the Man with No Name trilogy, I think. And funnily enough, that track is this big sprawling, almost post-rock song.
The thing which makes some of it interesting, and I can't remember which version I'm talking about, is the fact that some of the mixes are so wrong, as in the drums are too quiet, right, for most of those records, for both of the records, whether Jarcrew and Breakdance Euphoria Kids, which is weird because frankly the guy who really gelled that band together was Rod, the drummer. He wasn't just a drummer. He was, a brilliant musician. Quite a loose drummer, but a very inventive, multi-instrumentalist. So that was a bit of an odd feature of it. And say, even on that song, I think it's the one, Bill Carson, for somebody who was basically only known for insulting people in creative ways live in his song titles, I'm actually very bad at the band's song titles, so you'll have to excuse me. But I think Bill Carson's the one that's about 10 minutes long, and even quite early on there's some really loud Juno in it. Like to the point where any other mixing engineer would go, can we take that down by 7 dB or something, because it's far too loud. I think in a reaction I've only ever had before when I was reviewing a OC's record years ago, and I'm like, I don't necessarily love all of this stuff, but what is great about it is he's like, the guitar is going to be that loud, fuck you, you know. Whereas if Butch Vig was mixing it, the guitar would have gone, like, we're going to have it there. And even though that can sometimes go either way, it can end up making you hate a record. Sometimes it's amazing because it totally puts this thing out there as an outlier, you know.
It's slightly naive, but it does make it feel very sincere. And I would just say, if you're listening to this and you're interested in checking out this record, the original issue of it also had a track called Squadron Number 9 is the closing number on that one. That was released as a B-side, but that's got a kind of a part of that kind of at the drive-in freak-out style that they did when they were good. I do agree with you.
It's weird to say, because you mentioned at the drive-in, Blood Brothers, Trail of Dead. These are bands I have respect for in their own ways, but they're not bands I particularly like. Jarcrew to me are the midpoint a lot of these bands, maybe, but I love them. So it's so. I
think all those bands did certain things well, and that was part of why they got popular. But also, I agree with you, there's things about all those bands that put me off them and put me off saying that I'm an out and out fan of them, whereas I think there's the good elements pop up in this record without the baggage of the performative things, for example. But yeah, that last song, that Squadron Number 9, I think is good. It's a shame it didn't make the reissue, but overall that record is a really interesting suggestion. It's a name that I remember seeing. I remember hearing little bits of stuff in isolation. But as you say, it's very unevolved, but it benefits from it in a lot of ways. And it's definitely worth listening to if any of those names of bands that we've mentioned are up your street.
In any other hands, like if an adult record label had been involved with that, they would have listened to some of the choruses of some of those songs, and they would have gone, well, actually, what they would have done with a little involvement is they would have improved it. But what they would have done with the involvement they would have inevitably ended up having would be of ruining it. But I don't think that, although having said that, I remember seeing Jarcrew headline over a band called Funeral for a Friend in Club of Bark in year whatever, I don't know, and there was about 40 people there. And I'd never seen Funeral for a Friend before. And I remember talking to whoever afterwards and going, that band will go nowhere. And within 4 months, and apparently I don't know them as people, apparently, all very nice and all that. This is the thing, when you meet people and they're nice, you can't really dig into them anymore. You can't. It's fucking just human nature. Unless you absolutely detest them or want to steal their wife or whatever. I was like, they'll go nowhere. And I think it was 4 months afterwards they were selling out 2 nights in Brixton Academy.
Yeah.
So
well, who's what do you want to go for next then, Andy?
Whatever, man. There's 2. You pick 1 or 2.
Toss that coin.
Yeah, like somebody choosing the IKEA rug when you go to IKEA. There's the 2 rugs. There's the one which is 18 quid that everyone has, or you can go for the one which is 35 quid, which will be a little bit more susceptible to stains. But maybe the guy who's like a first year doctor has. So it's up to you.
Well, do you know what I actually did yesterday, which I think I've taken a big step in my life here? I had to go and get a headlamp or just the bulb in my headlight replaced in my car.
Right. Okay.
And the guy said, do you want the £8, the £10 or the £15 bulb? And I said, I went for the £10. I think that's the first time I haven't gone the cheapest bulb.
Yeah. That was a disappointing ending, though. I thought you were going to say you'd got to 15.
No, I didn't do 15. And so I've always been an £8 bulb sort of guy.
And I punched the guy in the shoulder. So. Yeah, but isn't there the thing that there's that study which shows that the bottle of wine,
second cheapest bottle of wine,
the second cheapest bottle of wine is usually, because for me, my logic is I never buy the cheapest thing. But actually, my logic now, especially when it comes to, say, recording gear or whatever, is just buy the thing you want. It's beautiful. I'll deal with a credit card debt later.
Can I just say we started the last episode at IKEA and we're back there again?
Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's post-capitalism for you, mate.
We're getting old. Right, The God Machine. I've made the call.
Yeah, the God Machine. Quite an interesting band, actually.
Quite tragic.
Yeah, very tragic. You've gone for their debut Scenes from the Second Storey?
Yeah. Well, the second record wasn't really finished. So, because of the dying thing. So,
So they're from San Diego, and first half of the 90s, led by Robin Proper Shepherd, Jimmy Fernandez, and Austin Lynn Austin. But funnily enough, although they're from San Diego, they were sort of moved over to the UK, and most of their success came over here in Europe.
Scott Walker style.
Well, yeah, indeed. And then, like sort of tragically, their career was cut short when Jimmy Fernandez, he was at a brain hemorrhage. He just suddenly...
I believe so, yeah. I've got a bit of a thing where, and this is certainly no slight however, I've got a bit of a thing with death. It's kind of a policy to not even mention how somebody died, because it does somebody disservice, especially when they died young, that they end up being defined by their death. Because even when somebody died young, the death is the last moment. It comes from, having friends who died young or whatever. You don't want to just think of them, I remember him. Oh, yeah, he died young. Imagine if that was your legacy. Oh, yeah, he died young. Yeah, he fell down a lift shaft or whatever. Oh, poor cunt.
Well, in
all
terms of stuff. Legacy, the God Machine are a very interesting one. Very
interesting, yeah. And I believe he actually died, it might have been on the day that Kurt Cobain died.
Really?
So, talk about burying bad news, fucking Tory 2000 September the 11th style. Talk about burying bad news. There it is. There's another reason why the band doesn't probably have, to a degree, the legacy I think it deserves.
The lore, yeah. I mean, I think, as I understand it, without meaning to labour the point, Jimmy died just almost at the conclusion of the album sessions, but it wasn't quite finished, and the band decided they would do no further work whatsoever on the record in his honour. Even the track names weren't decided. That's why it's got things like Train Song, Life Song, things like that. They literally said, the band is over, Jimmy's gone, we're not going to even attempt to continue with this, and we're going to freeze it. This is a snapshot of his last moments, and that is his legacy, in the sense that second album. Which makes it a little bit difficult, because the album you've picked I really enjoyed. I'm not so keen on the second album, but there's maybe sort of like good structural, practical reasons.
It just doesn't sound finished. Literally, it literally doesn't sound finished. That's the problem with it, because I suspect because it literally wasn't finished. So, maybe those problems would have been resolved. You just don't know. It doesn't sound like it to me, but
it feels like it's going for a slightly different thing. The album you've picked is much more grandiose and ambitious. 78-minute epic with like huge kind of jazz prog things in it, whereas the second album seems like it's a little bit more concise. Seems a little bit more
understated, quiet.
And if I should doubt you, just give that doubt.
Yeah, focused, maybe slightly more ambitious. Like they maybe had a sense of they could start to push this project in a not necessarily commercial, but a slightly more, accessible direction.
Not a million miles away from stuff like Low.
Yeah,
not a million miles away. I mean, a few still, a good few intersections down the M4 away, but it's certainly going for a similar whatever it is Low go for.
So I was a wee bit dismissive in the preamble, but I did feel like I'm not a big fan of Jane's Addiction and their singer Perry Farrell.
No.
I am not massive into the vocal style that the God Machine use. Musically, I think they're brilliant. I really like it. It's not music that I've spent a lot of time with, but I mentioned Cult of Luna, who are like a post-metal band, but they're quite an analogue post-metal band. They're not something particularly clicky or sterile. There's a lot of room and there's a lot of reverberation and imperfection in the music. We did an episode on them. David's a really big fan, but it's definitely a twist on that genre to pair them with a vocalist like this. Does it always work? I'm not sure.
No, I don't. I think it doesn't. But again, going back to say, I don't even know if it really touched it. It being what it is. It doesn't seem that you've got a guy who is just there. And I've met Robin because he plays in a thing called Sophia now.
But death comes so slow when you're waiting to be taken.
And he used our friends who were a post-rock band called Vito from Cardiff. They were basically kind of his backing band for a while. And he's a lovely guy, very unassuming, very doesn't look like a rock guy, really good looking kid, like North American guy, but doesn't see. I think he lives in Belgium, I think. Very very nice fellow and all that. And Sophia is more understated, definitely, in a way maybe that second God Machine album was headed. I mean, vocally, again, it's not something where I would pick it out as my first choice. And I've always had, McCluskey's first website was called myspecialpain.co.uk. Obviously my pain and sadness is more sad and painful than yours. Just taking the piss out of, the competitive misery, which now we have on Twitter, in a way which is also real. That's the problem, isn't it? It's also actually real and worthy of satire at the same time. That's the fucking awful thing about it. But I'm not a fan of narrative in music, in the sense that I've always felt as if you need that narrative to make it interesting, then you should probably spend longer on the music. But you need a narrative to sell music, which is why it still doesn't astonish me that the God Machine aren't better known. But there's something about that, the anguish and the pain of that first record, which is something which would naturally not attract me, which seems to... there's something about it which seems to prefigure the things which actually happen to them. Now, and as much as I said I'm not a fan of narrative in music, as in, I don't know, I was about to say something very dismissive there, which would have been very funny and would have probably end up with me up in another fucking online beef with people that I just frankly haven't got the time for. I'm literally a father now, But narrative for a band, I think, is cheap. But we all have our personal narratives with how we relate to records, in the sense that this record came along. For example, Do Dallas, apart from being a really good, concise album, is particularly important to people because the kind of people who come to shows, because usually it happened at a certain time in their lives and it clicked in a way. Maybe it's usually for people maybe in their second year of university or something, or when you're between 19 and 22, that thing which takes you from your maybe a teenage loves and drives you into your adulthood, and the music you associate with that, I bought the God Machine. I went to Cardiff from Newcastle for my university open day, and I'd been to, the only other place I went to was Hull, and I left Hull fairly quickly. Let me say it was either Hull to do English or Cardiff to do journalism, and I went to Hull and I was like, I grew up in terraced houses. I know what they're about. I don't need to go to a place which is just terraced houses. And
Hull is the misery that many albums aspire to.
Well, you could definitely see it. I think that's a little unfair, but I think I could definitely see it being used as a jumping off point for a certain outsider art, let's put it that way. And so I went to Cardiff for the open day, and from Newcastle, especially at the time, it was like a 7-hour journey. doing it wasn't a worldly 18-year-old, definitely not. A 17-year-old, whatever I was, going down to the open day. And basically, I just went to the talk, and then I just walked around and looked for record shops, like any self-respecting person going to a university open day should do. And I went to the Hour Price in Cardiff, and I'd read this review in Melody Maker for the God Machine album, and I bought the God Machine album on cassette. And it was like fucking, even cassettes back then were like $8.99 or $9.49 or something. It's insane to think that, because CDs were like 16 quid then. So with inflation, that would mean CDs would be like £34 now or something. It's fucking crazy. So I bought it on cassette, and I think I actually might have bought it because it was maybe had £1 off or something, and I didn't have much money. But I liked the review. I can't even remember the exact wording of the review, but it was one of those few reviews where I think basically the essence of it was, it's like listening to these guys and they're playing in the middle of a crumbling Roman amphitheatre, and it's just everything's falling apart around them as they're playing, but there is a defiance, but really there's just a sadness as it's all sinking into the fucking mire. One part of the story is the review was actually perfect because it actually did invoke the album rather than going, the riff on song 4 is a good riff. But I listened to it on the whole train journey home, basically. So it's a formative part of my life. It's part of an adventure I went on. But there's also something absolutely magnificent about it, like something lost. And I'm not into like the song It's All Over, which even though it's one of instantly the least striking songs on the record. And I'm not a ballad guy, like, I'd always be growing up, I'm like, skip the ballad, whatever, fast forward through the ballad in some cases. Something about that song which is so lost and beautiful, and those words in anybody else's mouth would come across as trite, just beautiful. And I'm not a person who is then or now taken or affected in that way by music. Like sadness, I'm like, yeah, you're sad, fucking join the club, fucking let's fucking get on with it. That's basically my attitude to music and life, because I have my moments where I sink into it, and but I've always felt as if there was an indulgence to it, but there's something about that record, and it does have a real invention, like songs like that song, I don't know to what degree you listen to the album, but the song called The Desert Song. Which was released as a fucking single.
Yeah, it's got a video and everything.
Absolute madness, like, it's absolute. I mean, it's weird as fuck, isn't it? Yeah. It's weird. That's some of the earlier songs are riffy songs, like you say, with the guy sounding as if he's doing not a Perry Farrell impression as such, but the vocal isn't that far away from it, is it? In terms of its character, it would be ridiculous to deny it, since everybody who listens to the band says that.
Yeah, it is very early 90s in that way. It's quite. It's the vocal is the thing that dates it more than any other element, because there are still bands doing sort of post-metallic, post-rocky doom stuff that are not doing it any better than this musically. Certainly, it's the vocal that underpins it. And I think also the fact that kind of wistfulness sort of summons some of the late 80s stuff like Cocktail Twins and This Mortal Coil and stuff. There's like something quite melodramatic.
That might be the case. I'm genuinely not familiar. The kind of music but actually all of that music you just referred, I'm not actually familiar with a lot of it. But yeah, that's probably the case, because let's face it, they didn't come from nowhere, did they?
Exactly, yeah.
But that's maybe an interesting thing as to possibly why it appeals to you, but then also maybe why they didn't appeal to a much wider audience, because they were so hard to define. And I was reading an interview with, or like a look back at the story of the God Machine. I mean, we talk about Bill Hicks, but it seems that maybe their marketing didn't know what the hell to do with them, because they didn't fit into any slot at all.
Very
at
much
that
so,
time.
yeah.
Which, I mean, is a great thing musically, because you're like, oh, I can pick and choose, and it's not defined by genre. But it's really interesting looking back and seeing that they just never got in the slipway of anything.
Even their PR company made a Jane's Addiction comparison, which I think is sort of like an odd decision on their part, given the music. So yeah, I think that it does seem like they weren't sure how to pitch them to get that optimum sort of impact.
It does sound like, specifically like She Said, that sounds like, oh, that's a single that we can hit for the radio and try and get that alt rock Lollapalooza thing. But then, you listen to something like, the Desert Song or Seven, and you're like, oh, how the fuck do we sell that?
There's jazz, proggy jazz in it. It's just, it's very off the deep end at points, yeah.
Yeah, proggy jazz, that even proggy jazz fans have got to sit through lots of other stuff, because as much as proggy jazz fans think they like to eschew convention, they really only want to listen to proggy jazz. So it's like, oh, have we got you now? Have we got you? Have you finally lost your heart to the band? Well, here's something you'll fucking hate.
Don't get me back into my rants about things like niches, man, because the conformity, the anti-conformity is conformity in a lot of those genres, and the invention here is that these guys do straddle a lot of different things, and they do it at a lot of risk. The risk is that it never really took the way it possibly deserves to.
Absolutely.
This was my introduction to it, and I will go back to it.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic. But they are a band who, in very small ways, inspired a real devotion. Like back in the day, I remember reading, and it just shows you how difficult the music industry was at that time. When that album came out, it only sold 40,000 copies.
Can you imagine that now?
You're like, only 40,000? How did they live with themselves?
The post-grunge landscape, I guess.
Only 40,000. How did they cope? The shame.
How dare
the sheer shame.
All right, well, shall we move on to the last record, Mark?
Yeah, so Paradise Don't Come Cheap by New Kingdom.
Mexico is calling me. It's time if it ain't holding me to pack my bags and grab a crate. Ain't nothing better than an unplanned escape. Hell ain't catching up to me.
And
Well, you know the title of the album, obviously.
Not unicorns or anything else. Paradise Don't Come Cheap. 96.
Yeah, 1996, their second and last album.
Yes.
Can we stop making observation here? Andy, the three bands you chose, none of them have more than 2 albums. They're all very sort of like flash in the pan, short-lived projects for varying reasons. But do you think you have a subconscious attraction to the sort of tragic, sort of short-lived glory of some projects?
Honestly, no. I think they were just records I really liked, and I think, to be honest with you, it shows how little of an instinct I have for music, which will become more wildly successful. I mean, I can't deny there may be some truth in what you've said, but thinking about it honestly, you said, the email said about 3 under. I mean, there are lots of other underrated albums, like Damien's band's last album, St. Pierre Snake Invasion, for other reasons, but it's difficult to know conclusively if those records are underrated because they're still kind of in rotation, as it were. Whereas those records are maybe definitively underrated because nobody's doing anything else with them.
There's an end point. Yeah.
There's an ending, or at least enough of an ending to say even Jarcrew, we're going to be doing some shows with us, but it's an ending to all intents and purposes. But no, they were all genuinely records at one stage or another that I loved. And New Kingdom, I think, is probably the only example of a time I heard a song on Radio 1 and went,
Radio 1,
what the fuck is that? Steve Lamacq. I mean,
Jeez.
wow. And I went, fucking hell, what's that? That's weird as fuck. Like, it's not normal.
It's weird as fuck. It's not normal. That guy's voice is fucking amazing. Like, the other rapper in it has a more generic kind of post-industrial rapper kind of voice. Still really good, but that guy, I don't know the guy's name. Again, I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know. A friend of mine, Ant, he was in a band who toured with them and said they were like lovely guys, which again just fills you with joy. That's what you want to hear. But that guy's because he does most of the songs, doesn't he? The other guy, I think, does maybe 4 of the songs. The other guy's really good. It's not to downplay it, but his voice is just totally unique. It's got these unique tones which you just can't. Nobody's ever done that like him, I think.
Yeah, they're very interesting. Like, I love hip hop, and Dave both love hip hop, and this is the kind of hip hop that I haven't really heard before. It's like it's almost psychedelic. You know, there's a lot of psychedelic. It feels dead druggy in places. You know, his voice sounds like he's drunk the whole time, which is obviously his style. The affectation of it is really, really cool, I think. There's just a lot of really good songs in it. A lot of really clever stuff happens in it as well, especially for hip hop, and especially of the time it came out. You know,
yes, I think that's key, isn't it? That's key. And when I saw them live, and the only time I ever saw them live was at the Reading Festival, so you could say I never really saw them live. I'm not sure the blend of it worked as successfully as it does on the record, so probably exactly the opposite with Jarcrew. I did see the God Machine live supporting the Afghan Wigs when I was relatively young, and they were great live as well, but just something about them was unbearably tragic again, even before there was something unbearably tragic. But with live, it was just maybe live it was too close to being a band, whereas on record it had that right balance between. I don't really have the lexicon to talk about hip hop in as much as I do about rock music, but there's just something about the balance of that record which is for the most part great. At times it's a bit dated in the way that maybe the samples or loops are used. It's very again like a lot of the industrial music at the time. Like maybe some of the guitar squalls or maybe sound a little bit generic with the benefit of time to look at it, but I think I'm really attracted to vocalists who sound like tramps.
See, one of the guys himself, just we were trying to talk about the lexicon, one of the guys referred to it as performed hip hop, and I think there was sort of an emphasis there on the fact that they used a band. You know, they used musicians. Because I mean, was it Sebastian Laws? He came from hardcore punk bands. That was his upbringing in music. He wasn't purely a hip hop or rap guy, and so they seem to place an emphasis themselves on the fact that this music was being played, and not to the Rage Against the Machine extent of like being a full out and out rock band, because as you say, the on record it was quite different, but yeah.
I think it sounds quite played on record as well. There's a lot of really clever production on it. Whenever I've seen hip hop live with a band, it's usually a hip hop artist who's either reinterpreted large parts of their music to make it work with a band, and that's a stylistic decision for that tour, or there may be a band like Y who are actually a live band, and that's part of their whole vibe. Some of the stuff on this is just really cool. Like some of the 90s samples and the beats are quite good, or are quite dated, but you know, it's got this kind of trip hop feel almost. It feels like it could have come from Bristol in the early 90s.
Do you know that Tricky spent time in studio with him? He was apparently that they were a big influence on Tricky.
Yeah, see, that totally makes sense. But then they've got a lot of like almost Jimi Hendrix style blues guitars happening in places, you know, and lots of strange effects. There's songs that actually sound like they've been recorded and played underwater, which is just a totally bizarre thing, but it just really brings this whole laid back kind of psychedelic vibe out in a way that I've never really heard in hip hop before. And to me, I was like, holy shit, what is this?
I remember I bought what I saw. Just after I bought it, I woke up in my ex-girlfriend's room. We were still friends. It wasn't part of an elaborate sting. And we'd been drinking or smoking. I don't know what's the fucking difference when you're 22. And I had that album on. I was in a room by myself. I think she was downstairs, probably making baked potatoes, if I remember anything about it. Not a euphemism. And I fell asleep when I was listening to it, and I woke up during one of the songs towards the end, and it was genuinely like being in a nightmare. There's some really fucked up, weird stuff on there, and I think it's fucked up and weird because it escapes the more traditional trappings of the time, because obviously that stuff didn't sound dated at the time because it was the time. Now some of it sounds dated, but some of it, like, to be quite honest with you, I preferred, when I first heard it, I think I preferred the other guy's voice, you know, whereas as the years have gone by, because that was more the stuff I was listening to at the time, whereas over the years the more unique aspects of it have come out, and the two things support each other, you know. It's like, what's your favourite one of Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer? You're like, oh, for fuck's sake, which part of double act do you not understand? It's Bob, but still, I don't ask you that.
It's very swampy sounding, you know.
That's the right word for it. Yeah.
Fueled by liquid courage, product of a one-night stand, 38 caliber revolver slanging. I wanna hold your hand. The kings from Queens was blasting on the jukebox, something about tail-top sneakers.
It does sound like it's coming from, like, it's weird because the more you listen to it, the more you realise there's some sinister stuff happening in the background. Beyond this kind of psychedelic haze, there's something creepy happening.
Well, I get quite a sort of like a cabaret vibe and I guess his voice also, but just overall a quite Tom Waitsy vibe.
Yeah,
to a few of his records, you know, and we talked about Tom before, but
I think that thing you just identified about something going on beforehand, underneath that, I mean, that's explicitly happening in that God Machine record as well. There's that kind of swell of sound and everything which links all the songs together, which again is the kind of thing, if you normally told me about, I wouldn't so much roll my eyes as immediately stab myself in the face so I never had to be exposed to it again. But there is a whole atmosphere to that record which can't be an accident.
Yes, it certainly seems like it would be a conscious decision, because the whole thing's meticulously crafted. Even the songs that have choruses and are more single wordy, like Unicorns with Horses, for example.
Like that sometimes, yes, it just be like that
sometimes. It kind of straddles a line between kind of really chill and druggy, but also being kind of sinister, and with the hook which kind of draws you in. And there's a lot of different things happening in different levels there that it's definitely not accidental, you know. That's clearly engineered to be like that, and that was the most impressive thing for me about this album. There was, you know, the songs like, I don't know, Co-Pilot. She's got like funky 80s guitars, a wee bit of like a slappy 80s bass, but then there's just weird vocal samples some scratching and stuff happening in the background. You're like, oh, this shouldn't sound strange, but it does. And it's, I really enjoyed it. I'm going to go back and listen to this more because it left an impression on me that kind of made me feel unsettled, but in a good way. It's like
the first album's great as well.
I'm working with the hip hop jump on the 151 non-stop good times.
The first album's great as well, but the second album just hit me at the right time. If Unicorns Were Horses is just the fact that chorus is just incredible. That's a chorus in a song on a radio. You're joking? Like what the fuck?
Was that the song that you heard on Steve O'Mac?
Yeah. Such a weird, like, there's something about it which is massive. And you can have all those constituent parts. Just because you got big drums and lots of reverb on the vocals doesn't necessarily mean it's all going to be massive, does it? It was just something magic about it. Again, it's probably just that moment in time for me hearing it, and as usual, waiting for a baked potato to cook.
Smell of baked potatoes.
Early 20s,
wafting up the stairs.
Really craving carbs. The Andrew Falkous story.
Andy, if you think your lexicon in hip hop is limited, then you've never met me, man. But I am perpetually the whitest guy in the room, and when it comes to the hip hop albums that crop up in the show, sometimes I struggle a wee bit. So I'm going to lay some very honky references on the table here. But
I would say delete that.
that is definitely staying in. But I actually heard a lot of John Spencer's Blues Explosion, and I'd seen him mentioned in relation to them. I think I get the feeling he was quite into them. Because John Spencer kind of notoriously loves a lot of kind of quite analogue hip hop and kind of seeks to replicate it in the beats and the performance of their music. Also, and I hope I'm on the right path here, in the stuff that you've written, I mean, one of the things I associate to some, not so much with McCluskey, but with Future Left, you went in a lot more for big beat, and there's tracks where they're built around a sort of big beat. The structure, the superstructure of the song is this big, chunky, repeated.
You mean a big beat as opposed to big beat, like right?
Yeah. And I think like things like Kept by Bees, which we got to mention earlier on, or the track Something Happened.
Be honest. No one can tell them apart. Things are awkward.
The track Fuck the Countryside Alliance, they all have very distinctive kind of percussive motifs in them that, whilst they're not by any stretch hip hop or even hip hop tangential, they show a sort of sensibility that I think I can see commonalities when I was listening to this. I could hear the space in the room, in the grooves, and it's something that you seem in your own writing to have kind of like developed more as you've gotten older.
Meadows, thanks for the meadows.
Yeah, I mean, I listened to rock music, particularly stuff like Queen, until I was about 15 or 16, and then basically I pretty much exclusively listened to hip hop for about 3 years. And then I remember one of the moments I fell out of love with hip hop was seeing like the video for the second Wu-Tang album. The first single is called Gravel Pit. And the video's basically like, wow.
The Flintstones?
Yeah, the Flintstones, but unbelievably 1 million times more sexist, if that's possible.
Yeah.
It was basically like an updated Whitesnake video. And I just remember I don't know, it making me really, really uncomfortable with it. That's what it is. Maybe I just wasn't very worldly. So, but for me, it put me off, and I moved away from hip hop for a long time. And I'm still not fully back. I mean, really, the hip hop I like. I mean, so New Kingdom was about that, just after that time. Actually, I was probably, but I mean, for me, really, the only later stuff that I've heard, which I really liked, would have been like, I love the Mouse in the Mask, the MF Doom and Danger Mouse record. I absolutely love that record. That's my favourite. Maybe I just haven't heard the right records. Like I say, it's not where I delve, but that's my favourite hip-hop album of the last 20 years.
Is this thing on like the fling with Mrs. King Kong this spring gone? Sing a song of slap happy crappiness. He came to blow like it was strapped to his nappy chest. Surely I jest the best on a wireless mic, not an eye test. Yet I digress. But why stress?
Like we've had this conversation quite a bit in the show, and we've kind of tiptoed around the kind of complex conversation of, you know, that genre and its misogyny and, you know, double standards and how it's approached and how it's read by the audience. But we have also managed to find, I think, a number of hip hop albums that have kind of swum against that current. And there's people like POS, albeit, you know, POS had his own sort of brush with notoriety. We've had people like Saul Williams who seem to share that sort of distaste for the tropes that have become the norm in hip-hop, and whilst they've kept a lot of the musical sensibilities, they've sort of eschewed these other aspects of it, and it's quite refreshing. So there are definitely...
Analysis of hip-hop is literally an intersectional minefield, isn't it? Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. Where do you even begin? So the way I begin is by not beginning, and it's one of those situations like whenever anybody's talking about anything, is you just listen to them, and eventually you agree with somebody, or you agree with somebody a little bit less, because also, frankly, it's okay not to know, because all the people involved in it don't necessarily know, and you don't want to make it like, you know, Muslims with Saudi Arabia or Jews with Israel. Not every person of colour involved in hip-hop needs to have an opinion on what hip-hop is, but necessarily it tends to come to that, doesn't it, because of the way press works and everything. I kind of struggled with it for those reasons, and I'm not somebody who probably even considers myself as somebody who needs to have an activist bent to stuff when I'm listening. I'm not an activist for a fucking star. I'm somebody who tries to follow my own conscience, but I really did struggle with it. I had a friend of a girlfriend I had when I was in my early 30s. She was an amazing woman, and she was a feminist in the most strident sense of the word, but in a way that, you know, in an arguable way, but not fucking shy about getting into fights with everybody all over the shop, in a way which just wasn't, you know what it's like. Somebody can propagate certain views and they come across like a dick. Somebody else can say the same things, and it's real, and there's something right about it. It's the messenger as well as the message, sadly, for convincing people about things. But she had, I don't think it was a job, but she definitely did some hip hop DJing, like, you know, rap mostly, but hip hop like in general. And I remember asking her once, how do you square that circle? And she just went, I just don't think about it. That's the only way for me to do it, is to not think about it. I'm like, is that a cop-out? She's like, probably. Well, in fact, no, definitely. And you're like, okay, you know, because it doesn't... I don't, as a white... Well, I don't know. Having read some threads recently, am I middle class or am I from planet fuck? I don't know. But I'm a working class, middle class, white man from a place which knows no coats. So... how else do you listen to a lot of hip-hop except vicariously?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. So I try, apart from all that stuff I said, I try not to give my opinion.
Try not to have an opinion apart from...
Yeah, but I tried to have a huge opinion on why I don't have an opinion. You know, that's the basic fundamentals of it. But I think it's a really magical record.
Yes.
So very much, I suppose, like the other two records, very much a part of its time.
Well, I mean, even if none of our listeners like these three albums and take anything from it, I personally have really enjoyed all three.
Oh, amazing!
Anything on top of that is a bonus. But
it's very punk. Yeah.
So that's very nice, because you're not talking about stuff which, you know, flows wildly through popular culture, and I suspect knowing things, knowing all of Jarcrew, having met the singer of the God Machine and knowing things about New Kingdom, I'm sure all of those people would be really satisfied with that. So that's really lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for
absolute pleasure.
Bringing those to the table. So, Andy, we have a final present for you as a thank you. We maybe told you in advance about a thing called the Nexus, but what we do is we pull a name out of the hat once a week, and the guest or the subject of the podcast, we have to nexus them to that person.
This is the first time we're seeing Nexus tonight. Will it be the last? What do they have in store for us? Not good for
Why am I here? You're in the Nexus. This is the Nexus. For you, this is what you wanted.
So the three of us had the task of connecting you in as many or as few interesting steps as possible to Meatloaf.
Right.
That was the name that the pop produced. Right. So that's what's going to happen now. Guys, who wants to go first? Do you want me?
I'll happily go first.
David.
Yeah. So, Mr. Falkous, I believe that was it 2009, UK Music decided to use your letter about illegal downloading in a full-page advert of The Guardian. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, they did. Although really, it was about early leaks of albums. But
yeah, that's right. Because that Future the Left album had been.
Yeah, as opposed to illegal downloading per se, as I tried to tell them all at the time. But never mind.
Yeah. Now, UK Music, the association, is a British umbrella organisation and is currently chaired by Tom Watson, the former Secretary of State and Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, which is interesting.
Yeah. Didn't he do some work for Wonga or something? I think.
I think he did. In his first year in Parliament in 2001, he launched a campaign to ban album sales of Gary Glitter. That was like one of his key policies was people cannot buy Gary Glitter records anymore, which kind of fell by the wayside. It was not last year, but the year before, in 2019, there was a bit of controversy because Rock and Roll Part 2 by Gary Glitter was used in the Joker movie starring Joaquin Phoenix.
Pronunciation. Yeah,
because he was, obviously co-writer and would have received lump sum as a convicted paedophile. That Joker film, which I know you really liked, Chris, I thought was bang average. Another actor who has recently played the Joker is Jared Leto.
Oh, don't do it. Oh, no.
In the Suicide Squad. I haven't seen those movies at all. But Jared Leto also appeared in Fight Club alongside a Mr. Meatloaf.
Bob.
So there you are. That's Andrew Falkous to Meatloaf in 6 links and only one paedophile mentioned.
Watching Jared Leto get his face pummeled in that film is definitely his finest joy.
It's a joy. True joy.
Mark,
yeah,
me, you.
I'll go next. Mine's dead short, as is usually my MO.
That's Mark's style,
yeah.
And he's just in and out.
So on the Future of the Left album, The Plot Against Common Sense, you've got a really good song called Robocop 4, Fuck Off Robocop. As you know that in the first Robocop film, do you know the guy that played Curtis Bodecker was a guy called Kurtwood Smith?
I know the character, but I wasn't aware of his given name though.
Well, he also appeared in a film from 1980 called Roadie, which stars Meatloaf as the main character. He plays a gentleman called Travis W. Redfish. The film Roadie is actually about a roadie, funnily enough, but it's got loads of people in it, like
massive cameo central. It's got a band with Debbie Harry in it, doesn't it?
It's got Blondie in it. It's got Alice Cooper in it. It's got Roy Orbison in it. Hank Williams Jr.
It's fucking stinking.
Yeah, it's a shit film. Apparently, I've never seen it. Don't think I'm ever going to see it. But yeah,
Roadie. I mean, the clues in the title, innit?
Yeah. So there you go.
Wow, that was quick, mate.
Yeah. So Andy, I usually give these guys a hard time because they're always using movies in their next eye, right? And movies, that's some easy meat. I don't like using movies because it's too fucking simple. Okay,
too many cast members. Yeah,
I do like mentioning Nazis. Okay, so Andy Falkous, you had a dad. Your dad apparently rewrote the song "There Is a Green Hill Far Away."
Yeah, for a child's kind of for a children nativity thing, yeah.
And then you kind of broke his heart by saying that you preferred the original,
which I don't anymore. But yeah, that is the case. Yeah.
So another alternative version of that song was by the 18th century poet William Cowper. Mark, you're the literary one amongst us. Do you know William Cowper?
I actually don't know.
Right, well, you're losing it. William Cowper was seen as a bit of a forerunner of the Romantic poetry movement, quite an intense guy. He had some fights with depression, serious ones that also led to him spending time in an insane asylum. Prior to one of those trips to an insane asylum, he came up with his own version of that tune, which was titled "There Is a Fountain Filled with Blood."
That's nice.
It's nice. He was apparently very good friends with the guy John Newton who wrote Amazing Grace. But William Cowper was actually a bit of a fucking lad in a good way. He wrote a lot of anti-slavery poetry, which, I mean, for the 18th century is fucking good going. And he was a big supporter of the abolitionists. His 1788 poem "The Negro's Complaint" was often quoted by Martin Luther King in speeches. So William Cowper, props to that dude, way ahead of the curve. Martin Luther King's assassination in 1968 and the riots that followed it were actually repeatedly cited by a Mr. Charles Manson. There's your first swastika. As what he saw as the beginning of the Great Race War. Yeah. It was always telling his followers about, and it sort of was part of what spurred them. Part of what spurred them into action regarding the Manson family murders, because they actually began with the murder of African Americans, including one man who was killed, and then they attempted to pin the killing on the Black Panthers to discredit them at the time. By the way, weirdly, given all this chat, Martin Luther King, Charles Manson, obviously a very racist guy, his second son was called Charles Luther Manson, and I don't know where the Luther was coming from. Anyway, so weirdly, and I think I might have used this in one of the very early episodes we did, okay, but Charles Manson obviously was on the west coast of the USA. In Meatloaf's autobiography, To Hell and Back, which I read in about 2003 on a trip to the northwest of Spain, and I have to say, it was honestly one of the fucking most enjoyable biographies I've ever read. It's fucking brilliant. He gets about 17 concussions in the course of this book, including getting his head stuck in the steering wheel of a Cadillac because he was checking out a girl's bum. Right, but one of the chapters in this is only about 5 pages long, and it's Meatloaf describing driving down what I think the Pacific Coast Highway was, State Route 1 or whatever it's called, and he's driving down that highway on his way into LA, and he sees a hitchhiker and he stops and he picks up the hitchhiker, which was something that he said he just did semi-regularly, and he would chat to them, they put on tunes, and he's talking to this hitchhiker, and the guy's really, really into music, and they get to talking about the Beatles, and then the guy starts getting really intense about the Beatles, starts talking about the messaging and Helter Skelter, all these kind of things. Eventually Meatloaf drops him off, and what had started as being quite a nice little car ride had gotten a little bit fucking weird, so he was quite relieved when the guy got out the car. And he says just a few months later he's watching the news and it's Charles Manson getting arrested for the Manson family murders, and that's who he'd picked up in his car on the way down the coast.
Well, Meatloaf. Wow. Do you believe that story, or does it?
I do believe it. I actually do believe that story. Meatloaf, like, there's something about that autobiography. As much as Meatloaf's 17 concussions clearly left him with some permanent brain damage these days.
There's a song title. Meatloaf 17 concussions. That's a song title. I mean, and that song would Andy, not be about Meatloaf. You know.
If these 3 hours of podcasting have brought you anything, they've brought you at least one decent working song title.
I'm going to make a note of Meatloaf 17 concussions, because where's my title master list? I've got it in notes somewhere.
Can you peek behind the curtain?
I wrote a song yesterday called Imagine a Bass Player. Meatloaf 17 and a song called
Like it.
This will be a real feather in our cap if that ever does make
it. Let's see.
And
you never know. You never. I mean, I did try and write a song last week called "Endless North London Police Helicopter." So, and a big black piss take called "Jesus Population Jesus." So
we've got a lot of competition, is what you're saying. So Andy, just as a final bonus thing before we say goodbye, the last and possibly most important nexus that we could have come up with is the fact that I believe you apparently wooed Julia via an interpretive dance to the song China in Your Hand by T'Pau.
Correct. I wouldn't say wooed. That would be
And famously, Meatloaf would do anything for love, but he wouldn't do that. And that was that.
Wow, that's a short. That's not much a nexus as a nexet, but but yeah, that I don't think myself or Julia will ever forget that moment. I'm not a dancer at the best of times, but there's something about that song.
It paid off when it counted, Andy. It paid off when it counted. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth.
Eyes wide like a child in the form of man. I mean, we're in areas none of us ever needed to go at that point. You know, where even are you, Carol? Where are you? I don't know where you are, and I don't know if you'll ever get to come back. But yeah. I enjoyed all of those. You definitely need more hobbies, but they were.
That's true. Who knew you and Meatloaf lived such parallel existences? Andy, thanks for being so generous with your time.
Yep,
no problem at all, mate. Really enjoyed it.
A lot of fun. That one micro can of Diet Coke about a week ago has served you really, really well.
It has. It kept me going, and I didn't do any childcare in the interim, and my cats wandered in. I think Bonsai here has lost. How much weight you lost, darling? A lot of weight anyway. But yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And actually, my Bluetooth headphones are just running out of juice as we're wrapping up. So over this week period, so get the jabbers, mate. Week-long battery life. Fucking some business.
Well, I'm gonna leave you guys, and I'm going to go and watch the last ever episode of Sopranos for the first ever time.
Oh, holy shit!
Yep. Okay. That's how my night's. That's how my night's going to end.
Yep.
So yeah, a total buzz. Thank you very much.
No, mate, an absolute pleasure. And thank you. I really hope if that show we're doing next year, if you guys want to come along, just obviously let us know, and maybe get a beer or something, and hopefully in non-plague times. That would be very sweet.
Yeah, that would be a treat.
That would be nice.
Good stuff. All right, take care of yourself, Andy. I hope Julia is feeling well.
Yeah, thank you, man.
Yeah, get through the rest of this lockdown in good health, man.
Yeah,
all right?
Take care. Don't fuck it up unless it's really funny. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.